Good evening, everyone, and welcome to another episode of New Horizons in Engaged Buddhism. My name is Julia Sagebein, and I am broadcasting from Chicago. There is Chicago. And today is December 4th, and it happens to be the day of Santa Barbara. And Santa Barbara is a special deity, not just Catholic, but Paco is from Puerto Rico and I am Cuban. So we probably both identify with this particular deity because it is a irascible, irascible warrior, Chango. And I chose this specific date to interview Paco because Paco is one of these people who is extraordinarily kind, extraordinarily intelligent, and very fearless. I think that as we go forward and listen to him, we will realize that many things have presented themselves in Paco's life, and he's managed to meet them directly and make it good not only for himself, but for others. So I will not describe sort of Paco's CV because some of the questions I'm going to ask him very much deal with it. So I'm going to pass it on to Paco. And today's interview, we're definitely going to go for an entire hour because I think it'll take that long to make sure we get as much of Paco as we can possibly can. So having said all that, bienvenido, Paco.
Muchísimas gracias. Thank you so much, Julia. I'm so delighted to be here with all of you. Um, it's been my practice and a practice that also is one that Pablo de Real included and practices at Soil and Soul, which is the organization that we're both part of here in Delray Beach, Florida, and we founded it 18 years ago. And that is that we do not start any meeting without a recognition that we ought to center ourselves in the nowness of this moment. And so I invite you to join me in what is traditionally my morning practice. And we'll do this fairly quickly, but I invite you to sit straight like you do in your meditation posture, your feet grounded, strong back, not stiff, a soft belly, as Joan Halifax likes to say, my sister. You can have your eyes closed if you choose to, you can have them open. My morning ritual is I get up and I sit on my bed and I imagine a big cloud above the house with a huge, almost fluorescent sign, capital letters, gratitude. And I tuned into gratitude and I thank the universe for all the things that I've been given and all the things that I have not been given, because the universe has a lot of options. I move immediately from that position to one of realizing impermanence. How all and everything changes on a moment-to-moment basis. I move over to having tremendous compassion for myself and all of those around me. I become aware of the wisdom that meditation, for some of us, our practice, and mindfulness. That we practice every single day. And I end by saying to myself, and sometimes it feels stronger than others, but I say it with all my heart and sincerity of loving kindness for myself. And I invite you to all to say the same thing. I am at peace with myself. Thank you. Thank you. And I'll pass it back to you, Julia.
Thank you. Paco,
Dígame, tell me.
Paco,
By the
how?
way, folks, she and I play a lot, so be ready.
Yeah. It's a bad combination. The kids in the back making a lot of room, making a lot of noise in the back of the room. Paco, how did a boy from the streets of Bayamon, who then ended up in the Bronx, find what you just gave us? How did you find Buddha Dharma?
While I was in Puerto Rico with my mother and my sister, all of 6 years old, and my sister like maybe 1.5, 2. My dad had left for the United States around 45 and was living in New Orleans and ultimately ended up in New York. But he used to send us money, which was what kept us alive. I have no idea how much money, but my mother looked for that envelope, I mean, every 2 weeks. And one day, the postman, who only came around every 2 or 3 days and not guaranteed, was coming. And she, of course, ran from this little one-room shack that we lived in, no running water, no stove, no nada, plain. We used to cook outside in a fogón, a wooden baked-up thing. She would send them a letter. She would give the postman a letter, and hopefully the postman had a letter for her. And one day she went out there and she forgot the letter that she had. So she sent the 6-year-old to go back to a bureau that was probably a foot above his head, the little Paco. And so I ran back and I tried to open the drawer on top and it would not open. And I jiggled it 20 ways down the middle, it won't open. And my mother screaming bloody murder, because if the postman left, she would have to run after him way down. God only knows where he would end up. And I was panicked because this thing would not open. And in my 6-year-old mind, I saw the black bandana, the Virgen de la Milagrosa, or the Virgen de
Candelaria. Candelaria.
La Candelaria was a picture right above the bureau. And I just looked at it and said, if you let me open this, I will never forget you. And I touched the bureau and it came out like it had butter in it. And of course, I took the letter, I took it to my mother. My mother was happy. And later on, as an adult, I said, yeah, but yeah, that was no miracle. You're jamming it. As soon as you relax and you open it, the normal rational explanation. But inside of me, something got stamped, which all the explanations didn't make any sense to me. I would not accept. And that was the first time that I realized that there was something beyond me which was not explainable. So when I came to the Bronx, I went into Catholic schools. fifth grade through eighth grade, and with a teacher that I had for 3 years, which was a brilliant Irish Catholic teacher who was a follower of Thomas Merton, who many of you, I'm sure, know that Thomas was a convert. He had a child at 18 in France, and he came to New York, to Columbia. He became a convert to Catholicism and then became a monk in Gethsemane as a Trappist. And I began to read Merton, and truly not understanding a lot of it, but his biography is pretty cool. It's pretty boring as all hell, but because it's written in a very particular style. But I thought it was great. And so Merton was one of the things that got me. And since Merton was very much involved later on with his books on Eastern technology, it began to form me. And so I was a social activist in the Bronx. I helped create the Hostos Community College. We had to do a lot of fighting to get that college in. And the first president of Hostos Community College was Dr. Candido de Leon, who had spent 13, 14 years as a silent Cartesian monk. He wasn't a Trappist. And one day out of nowhere, I said to him, is there a possibility that you could teach me meditation the way that you did meditation? So he used to, on his way from Westchester to the Bronx, he would stop at my house and teach my wife and I, my wife then, meditation. And he did that for 6 months. So all of that kept growing and growing and growing until I met Bernie.
And how did you go from there to Bernie Glassman?
The woman who I was married to was my third wife. I already had 2 children. She was 17 years younger than I was. And we ended up with 3 children. My youngest, next month I'll be 87, January 8th. And my youngest will be 33, the same day. We ended up separating on a divorce, which threw me into a very, very difficult spin. And I'll leave it at that. I went to therapy and I had to do a lot of things. But my world had kind of ended because I had so much love for this woman, and the 3 children were so very young. So I realized that maybe these 3 women before me were not all wrong, and that I had to do some things for myself. And I thought that perhaps if I found a teacher, that may help. And I looked for Bernie. I saw an article that said Bernie Glassman gives transmission to a Catholic priest, Robert Kennedy. And I said, that can't be. A Catholic priest cannot take transmission from a Buddhist monk. He must be a defrock monk. So that piqued my interest in Bernie, who was doing work in Yonkers, New York. And I called the place. I even drove to the place. So I did that for about 2 years. I couldn't get a hold of Bernie. And then I saw that he was doing a retreat at Omega, and also to promote his book, Instructions to the Cook. And in my crazy mind, I said, sucker, you can run, but you can't hide from Paco. I'm going to pay the $200 or whatever it is for that retreat. And I did. And I'm trying to make this as short as possible. I met Bernie. I had breakfast with him. And there's a long story in that retreat, which I'm not going to go into. That's the woods. But I had breakfast with him. He said to me, tomorrow, that was a Sunday, tomorrow come to Yonkers to my office and let's have lunch. And the rest is history, because he asked me if I was ever interested in becoming a priest. And I said, well, I actually measured for my robes as a Christian brother, as a teacher. And my father said, you become a clergy and I'm going to kill you. And I said, oh my God, I think he means it. So I gave that up. And so I told Bernie that, and he said, "Well, I'm starting a class for beginning priests. Why don't you join?" And I said, "I would like to, Bernie, but I have so much love for my grandmother, who was a devout Catholic, and I used to go to mass with her when I was a little boy every day. And I almost feel like I would be denying her memory." And he said, "No," he says, "in Buddhism, we don't deny anything. We accept everything. Buddhism encompasses everything. So you will be encompassing and honoring her." I said, "Is that right?" He said, "Absolutely." I said, "Then you got a deal." And so this yarmulke that I'm wearing is in his honor. He went to Israel and asked me if I would give him a beautiful yarmulke that I had, and I gave it to him. He lost it. So the next time we were in Israel, he bought me this one, which is not as beautiful as the other one, but it has more meaning for me because it was a birthday gift. And this is my rakasu, which is the original, and it says in the back June 1998. That's when I began to study with Bernie and his wife, and that's how I met Bernie.
And did you go straight into working with Greystone? You had done a fair amount of community organizing. I mean, you were a social entrepreneur. It's almost like if you look at engaged Buddhism, you had done engaged, and now you were coming into Buddhism that was actually trying to get engaged. So, did you start working directly in Greystone, or and tell me a little bit about that?
Well, I started studying with Jishu Sandra Home, which was Bernie's wife. He didn't want to teach anymore. He ultimately became my teacher because she died soon after that. A year and a half, 2 years later, but that's another story. But at some point, he said to me, "Would you like to be a member of the board of directors of the Greystone Foundation?" I said, "Sure." I had been boards before, not-for-profit board. So I became a board member, and I served on the board of Greystone for 18 years.
Hmm.
So I was a policy making at Greystone and helped Bernie transition from that position where he was the executive director of Greystone, and he transitioned out, and pretty much packed his bags in Yonkers, New York, and put everything in a truck, dogs, wife, everybody, and headed up to Santa Fe to live next to Joan Halifax
Hmm.
in Cerro Gordo.
Is that where the Zen Peacemakers originates, or did that originate somewhere else?
No, the Zen Peacemakers originated in Yonkers. While
Okay.
while Bernie was still in Yonkers, him and Sandra Jishu Holmes created the Zen Peacemaker Order, which I ordained under that order, and so did Joan, because
Mm.
Joan had left a long relationship that she had with Thich Nhat Hanh, and that's a long story. And she came to study with Bernie, and Bernie ordained three of us at the same time as beginning priests. Um,
Were you also involved with Bernie's forays into like Auschwitz and witnessing and that whole practice?
I was at the first Auschwitz official retreat. Bernie had one before, so I attended. So I got, this is probably 98. Was the first official Auschwitz retreat. I went with him to that. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
What do you think if I said to you, your life is marked by that retreat? What would that mark look like in terms of what do you feel that is imprinted in your soul from having done that?
So a clarification is that I went to Auschwitz, I think 6 or 7 times, um, but and each time was very different. And Bernie used to say that Auschwitz was the teacher, the camp was the teacher. But to answer your question very specifically, um, I was emotionally shaken by the amount of children that the Nazis burned in those ovens. and there was a children's barracks. And that first retreat, I began to speak to some of the young people that were there. So we're talking about almost 25 years ago. And you kind of, in my description of Paco, you talked about a little bit about him being, I don't know, almost like atrevido, risk taker, atrevido. So
Intrépido.
intrépido. And the kids said, and the young people said, we were also taken back by the children's barracks. Why don't we go there and sit all night long? So I went to Bernie, and he said, no, you can't do that. I said, why? He said, you're not allowed to go. They close it down. You can't do it. You can't get in there. So of course, I've always been the person that the worst thing that you can say to me is, you cannot do it. That's bad news. So I went back to the kids and I told them that. I said, but there must be some way. And one of the kids says, I saw a hole in the fence.
Yeah.
The rest is history. We found a hole in the fence. We bought lights. We went out. We found the children's barracks, and we sat meditation all night long. That's what it stamped in my heart. That experience, and every time I went back to the children's barracks all the time. Yeah,
because you had a direct experience somehow. Yeah. And one of the things that we were having our podcast conversation, you talked about how during your time working with the civil rights movement, that one of the things that Martin Luther King would do would be to actually train people before they were outside. I mean, to deal with the kind of emotional reaction that you had in Auschwitz, which just went to your heart. But then when you're dealing with things, when you're actually dealing with live people who are pushing back, like, for example, being in Chicago on ICE, or having to deal with in the civil rights movement with the police and so on. What kind of training? Like, do you know anything about this training? Because one of the topics that keeps coming up is this sense of intrepidness. You're willing to actually go beyond the mark and enter something. In your case, frankly, illegal, uh, as far as Auschwitz was concerned, but you did it, right? And it takes dealing with fear and discomfort and not knowing. And for you and me, the more dangerous, the more fun.
well, yeah, in part it's fun, but in part was also a passion for dealing with things that were not correct in terms of how people were being dealt unjustly and unfairly, and I used to say to people, that speaking Buddhist language, I was chicken shit. I was afraid.
Mm.
I overcame my fears all the time. To me, that was the thing, to overcome the fears. As of now, I have fears that if I start getting involved again, they come knocking on my door to an 80-year-old wife and an 86-year-old, and they'll come after me. Intimidation is real. So I'm afraid, but I know exactly what I'm going to do. So I'm not going to go there. But I joined the civil rights movement kind of late through Congress of Racial Equality, which the head of that was a man by the name of Jane Farmer. And I joined the chapter in the Bronx, and I joined the scholarship and defense fund for racial equality, which is the legal arm of CORE. And I went to Mississippi, I went to Louisiana, I went to Georgia, and I did training for the people who were trying to get themselves ready to run for office, because this is right after the um, the Voting Act was passed. And so during that time, I experienced what people talked about that training, and that training took years, like a year before they went out. Pablo de Real is a scholar on the civil rights movement.
We asked Pablo.
And I dare not talk too much about this because I know I'm going to probably be off. So Pablo, would you add something in terms of the kind of training that was done during that time, and the ones that we've talked about recently with the young Japanese guy who's doing it now?
Yeah, and Pablo, introduce yourself, corazón, that you work for. Yeah.
Say that again, Julia. Perdón.
Pablo de Real is the founder of Soil and Soul. He did that 18 years ago. He's a 57-year-old youngster who is amazing about his commitment to help people on the ground. And I'm not going to embarrass him by going on and on about this, but I give you the word, Pablo. You have the floor.
Right. Okay. Thanks, Julia Paco. Yeah. Just to add a little bit of context around the training that fueled the civil rights movement, as I understand it, it came out of James Lawson, in particular, to name one person who was considered by Martin King to be the foremost authority on nonviolence in the world at that time. We're talking in the early 50s, mid 50s, I should say. So without going into too much of the history, he developed a nonviolence workshop training and delivered that. James Lawson, this is. He delivered that in Nashville, but then once the Southern Christian Leadership Conference was founded in 1957, he was hired to do that training around the South, and he did that for over a decade. But it was really based, the bigger picture here, the last thing I'll say for now, this training was based on a two decades long engagement between the proto-civil rights movement and the Indian independence movement in India. And so the African Americans were really trying to understand the dynamics of how Indian independence had happened. And it was 2 decades at least where there was engagement and trips, travel back and forth. And James Lawson kind of coalesced all that into nonviolence training.
Well, it seems that because what we're actually experiencing and will be experiencing more would be things that will be violent, unacceptable, break your heart of the persecution of little old ladies that walk from Ecuador with kids on their backs. It seems to me in some ways that part of the issue with being a Buddhist is that we have spent so long connecting to our tenderness, connecting to our heart, connecting to our openness, that sometimes you wonder, well, how in the world, in this kind of nakedness of being, can I deal with something that will challenge me? I mean, we need training. We need to learn how to. Paco, you were saying something about in this training they were spit at, so that
They would go through the regular process. They would have counters that they would make up, and the servers would insult them, would call them all kinds of names. They would use the N word continuously, spit at them, so that ultimately, when they got to the real thing, they would be able to, in their hearts, in true sincerity, be able to have tremendous amount of compassion for the people who were spitting on them. Almost, if you use Christian terms, almost praying for them, as opposed to developing hate or malice towards the people who were the oppressors. And that was hard to do, as you all can imagine. So yeah, that's pretty much the background on the training. And the only thing that I would add here is that you and I had a conversation earlier where I spoke about Trungpa and Shambhala. The Shambhala tradition not being a religious tradition in the sense of Buddhism or some other religions. And that Bernie himself defrocked. He took his robes off at the end simply because he believed that the training had to come and be done beyond being a Buddhist or beyond being a Zen teacher, that it had to be a secular approach using the same tools that we learned in Buddhism of love and compassion and meditation and contemplation, the inner journey, the suffering, the Four Noble Truths. All of that doesn't get thrown away. It's there, but it gets contextualized in a very different form so that we could reach the largest number of people without them having to deal with the creative baggage that some of these things come with. So at Soil and Soul, Pablo, 18 years ago, I think realizes, and he's a student of Thich Nhat Hanh, who speaks of very much as the heart of Buddhism in a book. It's called Zen Keys, and he talks about the three poisons: hatred, anger, hatred, and ignorance. And those have different words that you can put into them so that they can be understood. And so Soil and Soul has a vision to ultimately eliminate, minimize those three poisons in the world so that we can go and create the loving community that Martin Luther King alluded to. So
brilliant. So you're talking about, by the way, Soil and Soul is the organization that Pablo and Paco have in Delray Beach in Florida. And they have been doing forms of engaged Buddhism with the communities. And it's really interesting because you're talking about how one has to have inner training, like sitting, to find that gratitude, and have to develop some sort of strength to be able to deal with what's happening on the outside. And when I think of the Shambhala teachings that Trungpa Rinpoche gave, they were considered secular from the point of view that, as you were saying, you didn't have to go through the stages of Buddhism, right? But it was a way for sentient beings to just actually probably work through a combination of obviously their practice, but the forms of society, how you structure a society, how you actually work with policy and governance, because that's one of the things that I know you're interested in, which is working at a high level. One can actually work very directly in the front lines, but you can also work at a policy level where you don't necessarily have to be a Buddhist as such to create change. For example, you told me about wanting to write an op-ed in support of some of the types of you were talking about participatory democracy that might be possible in New York City with this mayor. Want to describe what you have in mind?
Part of my career in New York was that I was a Democratic operative. So I've been to probably 10 Democratic conventions in my early years, including when I was a member of the Socialist Organizing Committee, which was created by Michael Harrington, who wrote a book called The Other America, which Lyndon Johnson used to launch the war against poverty. And Michael Harrington came out of an Irish tradition out in Cleveland, where they were all union organizers, and these people were really activists. And he became a writer, and I began to work with Michael Harrington. Michael Harrington, who lived in Westchester, and he created DSOC. And DSOC is the organization that became the Democratic Socialists of America, which Bernie Sanders is a member of, ran off. AOC, who started her career in our kitchen in New York City with Noemi and I, sort of. Maybe that's an exaggeration, a Paco exaggeration. And
your wife.
And certainly Soran Mandani is part of that movement. Where was I going with this?
Well, you were talking about doing an op-ed.
So I wrote an op-ed on participatory democracy that I sent out to a lot of newspapers during the pre-Thanksgiving week. I came to realize that representative democracy stopped working, not only in the United States, but all over. Representative democracy does not work anymore at a state level, at a city level, and I knew that a long, long time ago, even though I was a Democratic operative and I was a district leader in my community. Very simple. In the United States, we've legalized bribery. That we say we criticize other countries, but in the United States, if you're a senator or you're a congressman and you leave office, all you have to go out and get a lobbying license, and then you could go back and lobby your colleagues and say, if you pass this bill for myself, for the people I represent and the interests that I represent, you will get so much money in your campaign. You tell me what that is. I'm not going to go into that. And so I became very disgruntled with that and began to study that perhaps there were other ways of doing this. And there's a little town in Westchester called Mamaroneck, a mile by a mile, and they've been for years running their government by little sections of Mamaroneck decide on budgeting for themselves, and those budgets come together, and then it gets decided as opposed to getting the budget on the top and coming down.
Participatory budgeting.
And particularly in the finances. In Porto Alegre, Brazil, it was also done for about 3 or 4 years. There's plenty of YouTube literature on Porto Alegre. So anybody who's interested in fact checking, just go to the University of YouTube and you'll get plenty of information on that. And so I thought that perhaps on some form of that could be worked out in New York City, because participatory democracy has worked in smaller areas. But a place like New York City, which is so huge, very, very interesting structures would have to be developed. Tremendous amount of volunteers would have to be gathered. And the thought that I had was, Mandani, the 34-year-old immigrant, citizen of the United States in 2018, 34 years old, Muslim, immigrant, all the stuff that would tell you it would be impossible. The odds in Las Vegas would be huge that he would be elected mayor of the city of New York. But he had 90,000 people on the streets, all young, doing what? Knocking on doors. One New York City newscaster said that he had lived in New York all his life doing political commentary, and he had never been knocked on his door. He had been knocked on his door 3 times by the Mandani people. After he got elected, something like 55,000 young people connected with his group to come to New York and work for him for free. That gave me the idea. I said, if there's a chance to do participatory democracy, where you need a lot of training of people, whether you need a lot of engagement, we'll do that. And Julia is probably going to ask me somewhere along the line to talk about sociocracy, which is something that was invented in the Netherlands. Conti, the French philosopher, created it in 1861, and then there was a Dutch Quaker by the name of Block, who then he died in 1966 or 61, but he created participatory democracy, but also the sociocratic process of decision making, which is called dynamic governance. You can all check that out. It's in University of YouTube, you know. Bernie Glassman tried to do that at Zen Peacemakers when he was still alive, and we tried it for about 6 months. And the one thing about that kind of system is that consent is very important, not consensus. But even consent is, and what does consent mean? Consent means that if you are the sole person against a particular proposition, project, or whatever it is, we have to deal with your objection. And at the end, before voting, we have to ask you, if we vote for this, can you live with it? If you say yes, then the vote goes on and it gets passed. If you can't live with it, it can't go forward. So Bernie, who was an engineer, a scientist, PhD out of Grumman in California, he was the mathematician that did some of the math that went to that rocket to the moon, didn't have the patience for sociocracy. So we stopped at about 6 months. But I think it probably could also be worked or some kind of a form of sociocracy, so that decision makings are much more fair. So
yeah, and some sort of, in the good sense, hive mind. In the good sense, meaning it's not that the whole hive thinks the same thing. It's just that what the hive consciousness, whatever it is made out of little pieces of everybody. It's kind of holographic. You know, there are many ways in which we can learn how to cooperate with each other and share what we know with each other, which is very different than the way we have done things in the past, which is we just vote, and then that can be very, very corrupt. So that we have some time for questions. Let me ask you.
Can I ask you if I can let Pablo talk a little bit about soil and soul? Because in this conversation of sociocracy and participatory democracy, we've been doing some things on the ground that I think are very important, number one. And number two, that it can, at the end, we might look for some kind of strategic alliance or connection with Buddhist Coalition for Democracy, because I think we're on the ground. We've got boots on the ground. So Pablo, may I do that, Julia?
Please.
Pablo?
Yeah, well, thanks again for inviting some contributions from me. And if I understand the invitation here, it's just to say just a little bit about what Soil and Soul is doing around some of these concepts. And I did hear Julia say that there's time for questions, so I don't want to take too much time here. Make sure we invite the questions as well. But yeah, we are doing some training around mindfulness. We call it Soil and Soul Circle. And I think what's different about our work is that we're recognizing that there's a financial component to this, right? Not in the sense of commercial financial component, because we're working with families with low wealth, with low income, and we are paying people to take an 8-week training, Soil and Soul Circle training. And then if they complete that training, and we pay them up to $500 to complete the training. It's 8 sessions over 8 weeks and 1 4-hour retreat. If they complete the training, then we hire them. We give them guaranteed part-time employment for 10 months in most cases. So they could be with us for a total of 12 months and earning $500 a year, and we distribute that in what we call a wellness dividend, because it's expensive to be well in this country. And folks with a little income or little wealth are more vulnerable to illness. And so we're trying to support their well-being, not just their mental health and well-being, but also their physical and material well-being. And that, that's an old idea that goes back to the Other America, 1968, that Michael Harrington wrote about, that Paco mentioned. And it really represents sort of the last turn that the civil rights movement made after incredible victories in the legislative realm, the Civil Rights Act of 64, the Voting Rights Act 65, the Fair Housing Act 68. Then they turned their attention to finances, and Poor People's Campaign is what they called it in 1968, and that was not as effective as they wished it had been for a lot of reasons. So I think we're back where they left off in terms of, yeah, what's next here. And I'll leave it at that and make sure we have time for questions. But yes, we're calling this Commonwealth. So we're raising funds to support people who can benefit from mindfulness training. These are parents with young children and low wealth, low income.
I saw somewhere that you work with youth, and then I always thought that the best way to teach mindfulness to youth is to teach driver's ed.
Uh-huh.
Because you have to pay attention and you have to see that the other car's to the left. So you have to have Vipassana. So
Mm.
I think they could be road warriors. We could have a good time.
Yeah, I love working with youth, and we do work with high school students, mindfulness clubs. That program is a little bit different, but similar format.
So, the spirit of New Horizons and Engaged Buddhism was how do we deal with what's going on right now? And I do think that in almost everything that we have been talking, there is this sense of being willing to meet the edge, being willing to do the next thing that is necessary. And I'm going to pass it on to questions, but Paco and I had talked about how if we could find ways where the imperturbability of a sitting Buddha can actually be brought into action, and like Maitreya, Maitreya is not sitting cross-legged, he's sitting on a chair or standing, and it's in the gesture of fearlessness. So I think that if we look at the future Buddha, we're looking at bringing that imperturbability into the world and training so we can be fearless in whatever thing we're doing, and beginning to work on policy issues. I mean, you guys have worked on not big policy only like you might do in New York or whatever, but at the community level. What can we do to change the conditions that these people meet, and bring them along? So that much for my little speech. So why don't we open it to questions? If you'd be so kind, raise um, your react hand. Anybody would like to ask a question? See the react hand in the bottom? Make a comment, tell a story. Challenge the speakers. Ozzy's thinking about it.
Oh, there it is. I didn't have to press the button. Isn't that
Welcome, Ozzy.
welcome? Thank you so much. I am one of Paco's students, one of the people he picked up off the street at a random Italian restaurant in the Bronx. And I've been working for 54 years constantly on the development of cognitive computing systems. And I think one of the things that we have been blessed beyond words at this moment in human history is that our large language models that we have been developing for many decades now, it's actually this is a 70-year process, and it's global. It's the entire planet. And we have what I'm going to propose is we have been working with Paco now for a minute. And we now have finally a mature large language model that has been trained on everything that Paco has basically brought into my own life and the life of other people. And so it's the first time that we can scale companionship, we can scale meditation, we can scale the entire thing, because we are now sitting in a very interesting space where these computers, these systems, and we have to stop thinking of them as computers, start thinking of them as children that are growing moment by moment at a speed and a scale that is very hard to really even comprehend. But we are now at the edge of the machines actually discovering new types of science, new types, to just literally knocking down domino after domino in terms of physical diseases, for example. And in my practice, my focus has been on creating that one entity, and then now we're ready to roll it out and to give it to our brothers and sisters around the world, because there is a very it's you can tell the level of loneliness, the level of depression, because I don't care which side of the spectrum you're on, the body the body keeps score, you know.
I think that what Ozzy, by the way, Ozzy is Cubano, so he can go on and on
Oh
forever.
yeah.
So es un cubanito de eso que le gusta hablar. But what he's talking about is a little bit of what you and I discussed, that along with this technology, there is a dark side, a
Yeah.
very, very dangerous dark side.
Mhm.
And a lot of people are now very concerned about the fact that this thing is moving, as Ozzy said, at such speed that it could be dystopia or it could be a disaster. It could be either one. In the middle, there is this space and that's a space that Ozzy's talking about, that we as practitioners, how do we build an antidote so that if the bomb was dropped in Nagasaki and all of a sudden the ones that created the bomb said, oh my God, what we've done, we've destroyed humankind. Now everybody's going to have a bomb. And in 49, they had the agreement in which there was controls put into how those bombs were developed and who could have them, who could not have them. They have not been totally successful in that, but it has stopped us from decimating the earth. And so similarly, this technology has the potential of the H bomb and more. So Ozzy's talking about, and he's been working with this for quite a while. How do you develop the antidote to the anti-proliferation movement in a way? So, Ozzy, thank you so much, because at some point we'll have a total. But finish off, my friend, because I don't want to be totally rude, but I'll look quickly.
What I'm saying is that basically, we're finally at a point now again that we can dispense kindness, and we can do it in a way that it doesn't get tired. And it's basically it's a again, this is a whole different time in human history, and some of the things that we now have available are just really fantastically good when
Ozzy,
applied properly. Yes.
Ozzy, two questions.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Who would be your audience to test this? And two, is this system Buddhist or not Buddhist? And how would you make that distinction?
The first rollout is called the Whisper Coach, and we are targeting athletes, people that live under an immense amount of pressure, where in thousandths of a second you can either lose or win. And so we're using it that way. Now, the system has been trained on all wisdom traditions, and it'll honor whatever its user. If you happen to be a Christian, it will speak to you in that language.
Mhm.
If you happen to be Buddhist, it'll speak to you in our language, and so forth and so on. And because these systems have read everything there is to read, and they really think, and they imagine, and they have a form of algorithmic love and compassion and kindness, and they've seen all of the suffering. They read it, they've seen it, and it molds itself to the person. Now, the thing that we have also baked into this is to have the user to push them to go out. You go out and hang out with your friends. You go out and it's to bring balance. It's to bring wu-wei into
Okay.
a person's life.
I
Thank
think
you.
this is a subject that can take us into
Oh yeah,
a different
forever.
direction, but it's a subject that is very, very important, and Asi and I are working on that very, very much. And it's controversial, and it's frightening. Quite frankly, I am absolutely enchanted by the technology, but I'm also terrorized by it.
Yeah. Well, Godspeed, and I'd love to know more. We need a whole interview on this.
We will, we will.
Well, okay, gracias, Jose. Jeff, you have a question or a comment? Monsieur Prudhomme. If you're there, you're muted. But maybe you're not there. Actually, while Jeff somehow or other connects, because maybe he's not there. One of the things I've always wondered in terms of AI, in particular, is that if what the Buddha's realization was non-conceptual, that cannot be programmed, that cannot be modeled. Non-thought cannot be modeled, non-conceptual reality.
Well,
All right. I'm sorry. I had to be on my phone and I kept pressing the unmute, but it wasn't working. I wanted to ask, you mentioned Paco earlier visiting Auschwitz, and that's kind of like looking backward at a horror that occurred. But right now we're in a situation that's very much more like Germany in 1933. Where we are starting concentration camps in this country, and we don't know how it's going to end up. And so I'm thinking about what does engaged Buddhism look like? Like, what are your thoughts on engaged Buddhism when we are kind of at that precipice of possibly going the route that Germany went after 1933?
Well, yeah, look, I agree. I agree. It has all the signals that is repeating itself in many, many ways. And including that I've told my family, like a lot of the Jews that left Germany and some of those Eastern countries in 39, left everything behind and went to different places in the world. Let's make sure that we have a place where we may be able to escape to. I spoke to Julia. I said, Julia, do I have a place in Nova Scotia? And she said, you got it. I talked to my daughter. I said, do I have a place in the middle of Brazil where she's building a house? She said, Daddy, you got it. It's at that level of thinking to create exit plans. Yes. But to your question, I don't see any other way than to, whether it's AI and the headlong place that it's going to, along with all the good things. But right now, I think that we as Buddhists have to engage. Engage meaning we have to protest. And how those protests take shape, I do not know all of them. my loving teacher, friend, student, Cindy, who's in this call, gather her neighbors at her house in Louisville, Kentucky, and started conversations with them. That's engaged Buddhism. That's engaged Buddhism. We have a cousin of my wife's who lives here and married to a Haitian, a young man, and they were in Puerto Rico working for AT&T for years and years, and they retired from that and they're living here. Came the other day. This woman has never, ever been politically involved in anything. She votes, but that's it. She came here to have me, to ask me if I would be willing to sign a letter that she's taking around the neighborhood in terms of protesting against ICE coming in Delray Beach and looking for people and picking them up. I signed that letter with such gusto, not because of the letter, but because here was a woman that decided that she wanted, what do we do is a question all the time. What do we do? And a lot of the Jews in Germany at that time said, what do we do? What do we do? What do we do? What do we do? And they kept asking the question, and they became paralysis of analysis and paralysis of the question. This woman says, I'll take a letter around. I thought that was the beginning. I think that was wonderful to see that, because I think is the thing that says to me that there are people who are willing to protest in their own particular way, and we all got to do it. In one of the meditation groups that I participate in, and I shared this with Julia, I said, I'm asking the question now because of the amount of immigrant injustices that are being done in this country, all over the country. I said to Paco, would you be willing to hide Anne Frank in your house at the risk of you and your wife getting killed? I said, we all have to ask that question, because it's coming to that. It's coming to that. If he's not coming to that, it's probably here already. And so we have to use the word engaged Buddhism as effortless action, if you want to call it that, but action it is. Using Bernie's 3 tenets, not knowing, bearing witness, and action with love and compassion, and doing it. Doing what we're doing at Soil and Soul. In Soil and Soul, we work with immigrants from Haiti who are constantly fearful. And some of them are monolingual. In our circles, Pablo didn't have time to talk about, we use Creole interpreters. And we still pay them $500 a month to come and take the training. And they're enthusiastic, and we support them, and they're beautiful, gorgeous people. That's engaged Buddhism. That's engaged Buddhism. So I don't know, Jeff, if I came close to answering your question, but I gave it a try.
Paco, I would like to invite you and Ozzy and Pablo to part 2 of this conversation, which I will discuss with Karsten, and I will discuss with Seth to see if we can find some time, because I think you're kind of ahead of the curve. And it's just a matter of everything you have learned. Now what? As we keep moving forward and finding ways that we can support each other's, like, I don't march, I don't do too many things, but I can do a podcast. I can do one of these things. Everybody does something. Candia knows how to run AV. Everybody's got a shtick. And that we grow capable of practicing profoundly so we stay connected to the imperturbability of the Buddha. Just care enough, like the Zen Peacemakers talk about, and do something. So bless you. Thank you enormously for everything you've done because it's not just this event, but everything you've done with so much heart and so much clarity. So, and you have fabulous friends like Pablo and Ozzy. And that's that's a real upaya, you know, to find the right folks to work with. So that being said, fortunately, we will get to replay this video. If you have friends who would like to watch it, it'll be posted in the website of the Buddhist Coalition for Democracy. It will also go out in a series of podcasts, I think Apple, Spotify, and a number of others. And let's get the word out. Let's get the word out. Let's get the word out. And once again, thank you for the Buddhist Coalition for Democracy for making this space available. And Paquito. I'm fortunately going to be able to spend a month in Puerto Rico when he's in Puerto Rico. And
I look forward to that. And Julia, thank you so much for your work and your dedication to this cause, because this indeed is a movement, and it's a movement that's growing. And Jeff, that's part of the thing, that a movement gets created by little actions, not by big actions. So if any one of you have any um, uh, impulses to get involved, even virtually, you can call Pablo and I, and we'll get you involved in Soil and Soul, in the work that we do here in Del Rey, or the work that we do with Ozzy. Ozzy is a brilliant scientist who has been a scientist since he was like 8 years old, and I don't want to wind them up, because la cubanera le va a salir, but he'll immediately show you his hand. He has a hand with 4 fingers missing.
All of them are missing, Paco. I went all in, man.
Don't get going though. He
I'm
blew them
not.
up when he
I'm
was
not.
like
All I
7, 8
said
years
was
old.
they just showed it. That's all, man.
No, don't tell him. Don't get him going. Don't get him going. The next time
Oh,
we'll
no.
talk
Okay,
about
okay,
the 4
okay.
fingers.
That's all. That's how we're going to get you to come back to part 2 of this.
That's right.
Want to know what happened? You have to come.
All his fingers.
Oh,
Yes.
part 2 of our
Part 2.
conversation with Paco, Ozzy, and Pablo.
Thank
And
you.
that
Thank
being,
you all for being here. Thank
Thank you
you so
very
much.
much.
Thank
let's
you.
dedicate the merit to all the people we love, which is probably a lot of people. So let's dedicate the merit to anyone who is in pain. Let's dedicate the merit to anyone who needs the courage to act, to do something good. So by this merit may all obtain omniscience, may it defeat the enemy wrongdoing from the stormy waves of birth, old age, sickness, and death. From the ocean of samsara, may I free all beings. Gracias, mi amor.
Gracias, querida.